This is the Voice of Golf Show with Peter Kessler.
Welcome to the Voice of Golf Show, and thank you for joining us for our first episode. I'm your host, Blaine Stenson, and it is my pleasure to introduce the voice of golf himself, Peter Kessler.
Well, the timing is perfect, partner, because, we really just saw the best golfer in the world since Tiger Woods joined the tour in 1996, winning on the best golf course in the world. So perfect timing.
Wasn't that something else to see him just absolutely decimate once again another field? He's just unbelievable. I can't get over how good his ball striking is, especially with that, the funky footwork that he does. But we might as well just hop right into it. Can you put into context what Scottie's doing to these fields and courses? Can you put that into historical context for us?
Well, they're like 55-10 football games, even though it only appears to be 3 shots, 4 shots, and 5 shots, the way in which he won his last 3 majors. 3 shots, 4 shots, and 5 shots in winning a major championship is a huge number given the way he's doing it, which is the way Tiger used to do it. He would, let's use the 2000 U.S. Open at Pebble Beach as an example. On the Saturday night before this final round on the Sunday, he had a 10-shot lead. And then on the Sunday, he then went out and extended it. And that was his history. Tiger won 37 tournaments in a row where he held the third round lead. People don't catch him. He doesn't back up. And Scottie Scheffler has just done it for the 10th straight time. And he's the same way. He doesn't back up. You don't expect mistakes. And you don't believe that there's anybody in the field who's going to come and get him. He does everything better than everybody else. Not since Tiger has that been the case. And I would use the Tiger until the Hank Haney relationship began, when he unfortunately accepted Haney's advice to change his swing to a Haney idea, which is really when he started to spray the ball and then the recovery shots started to happen. But until that point in the early 2000s, after the breakup with Butch, what Scheffler's doing is what Tiger did. He put the ball in play. He hit more greens than anybody else. And over the course of his career of winning 82 times, he actually averaged 28th in the field in putting. And a friend of mine said that's not possible. He had to have been number 1 in putting. It's the guy who makes the most putts. No, it's the guy who hits the most greens and doesn't 3-putt and leaves himself so many birdie chances from 10 and 15 feet and converts so many of them, is the only way that you can put together ball striking to the green and putting. So being 28th in putting means you've hit a ton of greens and you've putted really well. Now, this last week, Scottie was much closer to number 1 in putting and number 1 in hitting greens, which almost never, ever happens, because if you're hitting most of the greens, you're going to 2-putt most of them generally. So the guys who miss 8 greens and get it up and down and are 1-putting are going to have fewer putts, but that number would be misleading. So if you finish in the 20s in putting and you were first or second in greens in regulation, you're the winner of the golf tournament. And that's what Scottie Scheffler has been doing to the guys since 2022. And every year his putting gets better. If Rory chips it to 6 feet, Scottie chips it to 1 foot. Shane Lowry's caddy said after they played 36 holes together at the Open this past week that he's the best player he's ever seen, that he hits the ball to 10 feet or 15 feet on every single hole and makes a whole bunch of them. He's always hole high, never leaves himself a long putt. And if he misses a green, his touch is absolutely as good as Tiger's. So that's why everybody still watched on Sunday, because the best player in the world with a 4-shot lead that everybody knew he wasn't going to lose, you watch anyway because you're seeing the best player having taken control of a tournament and keeping his foot on the pedal and maintaining or increasing the lead. Remember, Scottie had the second best score of the top 20 players in the field on Saturday to Rory's 66, and Scottie had the 67. So it was a day he was extending his lead, and nobody got closer on Sunday to him than 4 shots. And so he just kept doing what he'd been doing, and nobody's going to catch that when a player like Scottie Scheffler comes along.
I remember you said to me one time when we were doing one of my little interviews for school that you were so gracious to help me with, that Jack used to hit, 16 greens around. Does he remind you a little bit more of maybe Jack's game than Tiger in terms of that, just the consistency on hardly missing fairways and hardly missing greens? And what about the comparisons to Jack?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the comparison to this point in Scottie's career, so then Tiger joined the tour in 96. So if you just look at Tiger from 96 through, say, 2002, it looked like this, because Tiger was just at the 2000 U.S. Open at Pebble. I walked every single hole. He just hit it down the middle. He knocked it on the green, and he made, a whole bunch of putts. Didn't make any bogeys on the Sunday, and won by 15 shots. But if we include Jack, because Tiger, that game then changed after he and Butch parted ways in 2000, 2001. Yes, it is more like Jack. It's a great observation, because Jack did that his whole career. He literally did that his whole career. I remember talking to him once, and I said, we were like driving in a car somewhere, and I said, I always find it hilarious when people say, you had a terrible short game. And he said, well, I didn't need a short game. He said, I knew I was going to hit 16 greens around. And he said, and I knew whatever the chip was or the bunker shot, I could slop it within 10 feet. There's no way I was going to miss 10 footers a couple of times around when I had the opportunity to make them for par. And so he said, so my game, and he said, and Trevino's game too, for that matter, was you put the ball in play, you knock it on the green, you take 1 or 2 putts, and you get out of town. And he said, Lee had a more creative short game than I did. He said, but it didn't matter, because he said, I missed so few greens, I didn't have to do anything fancy, and I usually missed them in the right place. So yes, the apt comparison to what Scheffler has done so far equals Tiger's early days, say the first 5 years on tour, and all of Jack's career. Always in the thick of the 86 Masters, the final round, wasn't hitting recovery shots from the woods with 5 irons. He's knocking it on the green, especially the last 10 holes, in which he went 7 under. Yeah, that's what Scottie Scheffler looks like to me. And also, I think in personality and temperament, the apt comparison is the one you just pointed out. It's to Nicklaus, not to Tiger, because Jack never went on the road to play golf more than 2 weeks in a row without going home to his family. And if you think about the end of the tournament this past Sunday, and you watch Scheffler, and the round was finished, and he had won the tournament and his second major of the year, and stomped the field, and he gave us a good smile. But the real smile came when his little boy, the toddler, was trying to run up the little hill to the long grass to get to his dad and fell down. That smile was the biggest smile of the day. That smile was, now I'm really happy. That's the same thing that Jack would be like. To Jack and his 500 kids, that was more important than golf. And golf was important when he was playing it, but then he could leave it alone, go home for a couple of weeks, and come back completely refreshed after having done what he liked, or liked even better than winning golf tournaments, which was being with his family. So yes, their ball striking, the number of greens to be hit, the consistency of the putting, the incredible touch whenever there was a lag putt. Jack was the greatest lag putter. Tiger was the greatest lag putter. Scottie Scheffler hasn't hit any balls more than 20 feet from the hole, so nobody even knows if he can lag putt. because his irons are so unbelievable. He hits it closer than Jack did. He hits it closer than Tiger did. I mean, it was just unbelievable how many times he had a 10 or 15 footer. But yes, that's the comparison. It's Jack to Scheffler. Except remember that Jack did it from 1960 when he was an amateur and almost won the U.S. Open, which Arnold did win, and he was only 20 at the time. Yeah, it's Jack was like that his whole career, and Scottie's been like that. So his temperament and his internal temperature are really low and really relaxed.
I always thought that was a better comparison to Scottie was Jack, just because of the consistency. So that's why I wanted to throw that one in there. But let's just get back to Tiger for just a second. So there's been a whole bunch of talk. If you go on any Google search or any of this stuff, it's all these articles are comparing Scottie to Tiger. So what about if there had been no Tiger Woods? What do you think we'd be saying about Scottie right now?
Exactly what we just said, that we would be making the comparison to Jack. So if Tiger hadn't existed, we'd be going back to the next great player, and that would have been Jack Nicklaus, and that would have been the comparison that people would be making today. It's interesting, though, that there's so many people who are able to compare Tiger to Scottie because so many of today's golf fans never saw anything that Jack really ever did unless they watch the 86 Masters on tape. So it's easier for them to make the comparison because they actually saw Tiger. But for people like me who were older and saw all of Jack's career and all of Tiger's career and all of Scottie's so far, yeah, we would have gone right back to the comparison. You know, you would have said to me, so who can you think of that we could compare Scottie to? And the answer would have been Jack Nicklaus, and I would have extended it just the way I did a moment ago.
Let's switch gears here for just a second. I'm just looking at the leaderboard for the week, and there's only one guy that I can see in the top 10. Two guys in the top 20 that were from LIV, and that was Bryson and that was Tyrrell Hatton. So how much better do you think these events would be if there was no LIV and everybody was still playing together? Would those guys be a little bit more relevant in some of these majors?
Oh, it would change everything, Blaine. It would have changed everything since LIV began, because you're talking about four really incredible players. Cam Smith had just crushed Rory in the final round of the Open at St. Andrews. You know, he had like 21 or 22 putts, and Rory had like 38. And Rahm was relevant, and Rahm was tough, and Rahm was able to win majors. Brooks Koepka had won 5 majors after Rory stopped winning them in 2014 until, you know, he got back on the case this year and picked up the Masters. And so Brooks Koepka had the 5 wins. Rahm was definitely becoming right there, one of the 3 or 4 best players in the game. So Brooks, Cam Smith, Bryson DeChambeau. The reason Bryson isn't able to get to the finish line in majors now is because they don't play competitive golf anymore. They actually gave up their career in playing first-class golf against first-class players on first-class courses for money and inferior formats that just took the sharpness off of their games. That's why Rahm was so upset the whole tournament, because, you know, he knew every time he missed a 6-footer. If I had only been playing, you know, the tour the last few years, I wouldn't have missed any of these. You know, and I hadn't even heard Cam Smith's name since he won the Open. But to think at the time he was 28 and just gave it up for the money, I think they're all kicking themselves. And so they aren't sharp enough to be able to complete it because they're not tournament major championship tested anymore, because majors come so close together and so infrequently over the course of the year. So you've got 254 days until next year's Masters. And those guys aren't going to play any competitive golf against real players until then. You can't just do it once a year. You can't just, you can't do it and be able to get to the finish line. Now, last year, Bryson won the U.S. Open, but Rory had a 3-shot lead with 4 holes to go. So, Bryson won, but, Rory certainly gave him a big helping hand. But yes, the face of golf would be completely different if those four guys had never left the tour, because they could have given Scottie a run for his money. I still think Scottie's a better player than those guys, but now we'll never know. We'll never know. I mean, Brooks won 5 majors after Rory stopped winning them, in 2014 and 15. So, yes, the landscape would be different. All 4 of them would be in the top 10. There's no guarantee that Scheffler would have won the tournament, and it's one of those we'll never know. I mean, it's like if you took the 4 best players off of a football team, or the 4 best players off, you take Ruth and Gehrig off of the 27 Yankees, then what have you got? You don't really know. So it's a question that'll never be answered, but we do know how good they were, and now we know why they're not so good now, which is they don't play competitive golf, and they're just not sharp enough.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at these leaderboards, I mean, Brooks, he's just fallen off the face of the earth. I think he was +7, and Phil, I can't remember if Phil made the cut. I don't believe he. Oh no, I think he did. But yeah, they've just been horrible for the most part. And like you said, Bryson, he's really the only guy that's been able to kind of stick around and stuff. And from what I gather from what you just said, you kind of think that with the U.S. Open last year, that was more Rory just doing. I don't want to bash the guy and say doing Rory things, but we know how he likes to collapse. But speaking of the U.S. Open, I know there's something that we've talked about a whole bunch, and we're definitely in agreement on, and that's the rollback of the golf ball, which you are a big supporter of. What are you hearing about that going forward and stuff? Is that plan still in place for 2028, or are they trying to push that up?
They have shoved that under the rug like the Jeffrey Epstein files. It's a complete nonsense because, they said they were going to have rules this year so that by 2028, the ball will have been rolled back at least 10%. And the manufacturers and the players and the fans and the head of the tour didn't want the rollback because chicks dig the long ball, which is completely preposterous because it's the only sport where you can't see the ball. If I can see a hockey puck on 1/3 of my iPhone at night when I'm changing lanes at 80 miles an hour on the highway, I should be able to see a drive get hit on the PGA Tour if you're sitting in front of a big television. And what do you get instead? A red line that curves right or a red line that curves left, and a red triangle that says target. What is that? I mean, why even bother to have tee shots if you can't do anything except see the swing and then hope that the horrible camera work will ultimately find the golf ball? But at that point, it's too late because it's coming to rest somewhere. So it's a really bad situation. Now, Jack Nicklaus in 1982, when they first changed the golf ball, the 384 came out by Titleist, representing the number of dimples on the golf ball. That was actually the first significant change to the golf ball in the last century. The golf ball, the modern ball, was invented in 1901 by Coburn Haskell. He went to B.F. Goodrich Tire Company to pick up a friend for lunch. He went into the factory, picked up a piece of rubber. He rolled it into a ball. He bounced it, went all the way up to the ceiling, bounced down, went all the way up to the ceiling again. He went, oh, my God. And he was a golfer. And then his friend came out of wherever office he was in, and Coburn showed him what had just happened. And in 15 minutes, they started the Coburn Haskell Golf Company. That was the modern ball, and that was invented in 1901. So when Oakmont, where we just had the U.S. Open, was built in 1904, Henry Phones already knew that this new golf ball, the Coburn Haskell golf ball, was going to be the golf ball of the future. So he was able to design Oakmont with exactly that in mind, knowing the ball was going to go much farther than its predecessor, the gutta percha ball. And literally the ball then didn't change for the entire century until 1982. And of course, the changes after that were rather dramatic. And that's why it got to the point where Jack Nicklaus, who said in 1982 when he hit the 384 Titleist, he said, I'm not longer than I was 20 years ago, but I'm hitting this ball much farther. So Jack Nicklaus recently finally gave up his fight against the rollback, and he said, fine, because what Mike Wan, the head of the USGA, sold him on was, we're going to roll the ball back a little bit now, and we're going to make sure that it doesn't go forward again until 2038, 13 years from now. But it's not true. And because what Juan came out and said is, okay, here are the specs that today's ball has to be consistent with. They already are consistent with those specs. So the ball isn't going to be changed until 2038. So that was a really dishonest handling of reality. But there, and Juan's going, so there you go. We're rolling it back starting now because I have a list of things that the ball can and can't do now. But the ball can do exactly what those things are, and there weren't any of the things that the ball was doing that he doesn't want from his list. So it's a complete lie. It's a complete nonsense. So the ball isn't going to change. The players didn't want it to change. The fans didn't want it to change. The manufacturers and the advertisers didn't want it to change. The head of the tours didn't want it to change. So they didn't fight it anymore. And the ball is that they're going to be the same ball, pretty much forever until 2038 when Jack is gone. And it's a shame because the second shot in golf with a mid-iron used to be the most fun shot in golf to watch. The 5-iron from the awkward angle, the edge of the woods, you're hitting the green from the wrong side, you got to carry a bunker you'd rather not, the green slopes away so you can't get it close to the hole. Without the 5-iron shot, recovery shot after an errant drive, you wouldn't have had Walter Hagen or Arnold Palmer or Seve Ballesteros or Tiger Woods or Phil Mickelson. So that shot's gone because they can now put the ball, in some cases, on the green on par fours. That used to be legitimate par fours, not drivable par threes. And so now they're chipping for their second shot. So they've taken away one of the great elements of the game, the second shot with a mid-iron. When those guys are building important golf courses, the Sloans, for example, and Alistair McKenzie, all of those guys, Donald Ross, their idea, and Tillinghast, their philosophy was that a great golf course being played by professional golfers at the top of their game in a major should have second shots with long irons to well-guarded greens. That is completely absent from the game today. And so a huge element has gone there. And the driver used to be 20% of the game. Now it's 80% of the game. So the bottom line is we're going to have to get used to watching what we've been watching. And for those of us who are older enough to remember second shots, that are recovery shots with mid-irons, that's gone now. And so these are driving contests. The driver used to be the hardest club to hit. The driver is now the easiest club to hit.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that because I recently, maybe about a year ago, I bought an old Persimmon Slazenger Ben Hogan one driver, and I take it to the range once in a while and hit it. And my friends, they're big on this whole thing that golfers today are more talented than they used to be, and they do this to try to boost up Tiger over Jack. And I always mention the equipment and how much harder it was to use that old equipment. So when they kind of counter argue that, I hand them this driver and I say, here, hit this, and no one can get it in the air. So I couldn't agree with you more on all of that. And I guess the last thing I want to ask you is just about that and stuff. Do you think because of the equipment and stuff, do you think that guys are more talented once upon a time than they are now?
Oh, once upon a time was much better than today because the harder you swing at today's golf ball, the farther it goes and the straighter it goes. It doesn't curve for terrific players. You go back to the last century and you mishit your drive, it was going to curve. You were going to hit some balls out of bounds, even if you're one of the best players in the world. So, yes, I mean, the game is completely fundamentally changed. And of course, we'll never know if the players of today would have been able to handle the equipment of yesterday. You have to assume that they could have, but there are many more players who are great athletes today who know that just an athletic swing, as opposed to a technically perfect swing, is going to get the job done. So yes, on that note, I would say yes, that today's equipment makes the game much easier for the players of today. We'll never know if they could have been the players of yesterday with the old equipment. And so that's where we have to leave the thing.
Well, and speaking of leaving it, I think that's a great place to wrap up our first show. I think that was a great opening start for this Voice of Golf show that we've been talking about for so long. So I want to thank you, my friend, for bringing me along on this journey with you and getting your old content back out there. I've had a tremendous time, working with you, and I'm really excited to do this again with you soon.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is the next time that we have one of these chats, we'll do it on camera so that people have the option of watching as they listen. But I think this is a great way for us to sort of kick off these regular chats about the game. And I'm delighted that we're doing it together. And so I appreciate everything that you've done, and I thank you for today, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
And we thank all of you for joining us for this first episode of the Voice of Golf show. I'm Blaine Stenson. He's Peter Kessler. And until next time, you be well.